Dear Dean, Professor Güthoff, dear professors and students, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to thank Professor Ongono first for his invitation to the Academy of Global Church Leadership and for the opportunity to speak about the Roman Curia, which has repeatedly been a focus of my research. Before I begin, please allow me to make a brief note. Unfortunately, due to a lack of prior communication, I only found out the day before yesterday that I was expected to give a talk on this topic today. So I only had one day, which was yesterday, to prepare this lecture. Therefore, I ask for your understanding if it is not as perfectly refined as it ought to be, and as you rightly expect maybe from such an event. Nevertheless, I will do my best to provide you with an overview of the Roman Curia. While the other lectures these days focus more on specific details, I was asked by Professor Ongono to give a general introduction to the Curia itself, its historical development, its structure, and its duties. Maybe we can have the next sheet. Here's the outline of the presentation. I don't have many sheets, but some so that you can follow maybe easier. First, some notes about the nature and mission of the Curia, then the historical milestones, the most important steps in my view, current structure under Praedicate Evangelium, function and tasks of the Curia nowadays, interdicasterial collaboration, and finally a summary and a short conclusion. Let's start with nature and mission of the Curia. Who or what is the Roman Curia? Although I assume most of you can answer this question, let me begin with a brief answer, but not in my own words, but those of Pope Francis. In his constitution, Praedicate Evangelium, Article 1, he describes the Curia as follows. Maybe next. Yes, here it is. The Roman Curia is the institution that ordinarily assists the Roman pontiff in exercising his supreme pastoral office and universal mission in the world. It is at the service of the Pope, the successor of Peter and of the bishops, successors of the apostles in ways that correspond to each one's specific nature. It carries out its function with evangelical spirit, working for the good and service of communion, unity, and the building up of the universal church, while also attentive to the circumstances of the world in which the church is called to carry out its mission. So far, Praedicate Evangelium. Interesting maybe in this context is the word ordinarily, which is already suggests that the Pope may use the Curia, but is not obliged to do so. I will return to this point a little bit later. From this short definition from Praedicate Evangelium, it is clear that the Curia assists the Pope in exercising his office and thereby in leading the universal church. Pope John Paul II similarly formulated this in his apostolic constitution, Pastor Bonus, also in Article 1. Maybe that's the next. Okay. It's written, the Roman Curia is a complex of dicasteries and institutes which helps the Roman pontiff in the exercise of his supreme pastoral office for the good and service of the whole church and of the particular churches. It thus strengthens the unity of the faith and the communion of the people of God and promotes the mission proper to the church in the world. So far, John Paul II. But we don't end with John Paul II. We'll go a little bit further, because he also vividly called it, I quote, the instrument in the hands of the Pope, also written in Pastor Bonus, introduction number 7. In my view, this is the most concise formulation that captures the essence of the Roman Curia. The consistency in how its tasks are described is unsurprising, given that its service and purpose have not changed substantially over the centuries and cannot ultimately change. Maybe the next. Okay, it's written. Well, let's go on with the historic milestones. least the most important ones, I think, because we could talk very long about the history of the Curia, but maybe a little overview. The Roman Curia is not a construct of modern times. Its origins reach back to the early centuries of church history, nor is it an immutable or static institution. Rather, over time, it has undergone numerous changes and modifications, which, in analogy with the history of the church as a whole, are not complete but continue to evolve. The current organizational structure is thus the result of a historical process shaped by significant and far-reaching legislative measures enacted over the centuries, each of which contributed to fundamental redefinition of this essential ecclesiastical body. Within the scope of this presentation, as I said, I can only highlight a few of the most important steps. Let's start. While it was not yet called the Curia, its beginnings lie in the early church. As early as the 1st and 2nd centuries, the Bishop of Rome relied on trusted clerics and deacons to support him in administrative and pastoral tasks. These assistants formed the nucleus of what would later become the Roman Curia. Then, in the 4th century, following the legalization of Christianity under Constantine the Great and the growing significance of Rome as a center of ecclesiastical authority, the Bishop of Rome took on a more defined leadership role, supported by an expanding bureaucracy. In the Middle Ages, the Curia developed into a more formalized structure. Under Pope Gregory VII in the 11th century, the Gregorian reforms sought to free the church from secular influence, leading to a more centralized and hierarchical administration. The formation of the College of Cardinals during this period further solidified the papal advisory system. During the Renaissance and Baroque periods, the Curia became a powerful institution, extending its influence beyond church matters into diplomacy and international politics. Notably, the Congregation of the Inquisition and the Sacred Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith were founded during this time, emphasizing the Curia's role in doctrinal oversight and missionary work. Then we can, yeah. You see, we go forward very fast. Well, a significant early reform of the Roman Curia was undertaken by Pope Sixtus V in the 16th century through his apostolic constitution Immensa Terni Dei. Of even greater importance for the so-called 16 reform was the influence exerted by the preceding Council of Trent, which has sought to foster a spiritual renewal of the church and to promote its sanctity. Although not its primary objective, one of the Council's concerns was to enhance and adapt both the service-oriented character and the organizational structure of the Roman Curia within this broader context. Pope Sixtus V assumed this task by establishing a coherent administrative framework composed of 15 congregations. Well, not all of these congregations were newly instituted by the Apostolic Constitution. Several congregations had existed for some time before. Nonetheless, Sixtus aimed to comprehensively reorganize them, revise their structures accordingly, define their respective competencies and functions, and thereby systemize the operations of the Roman Curia. And we make a bigger step forward, because for more than 300 years, the norms established by Sixtus remained fundamentally determinative for the structure and functions of the Roman Curia. Although the dicasteries were not entirely left unchanged under his successors, the modifications or adjustments made were of limited scope and never amounted to a comprehensive revision. Over time, and despite occasional papal modifications, the need for thorough reform of the Roman Curia became increasingly evident. Among the reasons for this were the excessive proliferation of curial offices, overlapping competencies, and the lack of a clear distinction between the Forum Internum and the Forum Externum. It was then Pope Pius X who, with the Apostolic Constitution Sapientia Concilium, 1908, undertook a comprehensive reorganization of the Curia, reducing the number of dicasteries from 37 to 19. This constitution restored a distinct profile to each dicastery by eliminating redundancies and overlaps in responsibilities, and by more precisely defining and delineating their respective areas of competence. In the 20th century, one event exerted an immense influence on the Church as a whole and on various areas in particular. Surely you all know that. The Second Vatican Council, of course. This council was also of considerable significance for the Roman Curia. The Council Fathers expressed the desire that the dicasteries of the Roman Curia be restructured in a way that would be more appropriately adapted to the needs of the times, the various regions, and the different rites, especially with regard to the number, names, competencies, procedures, and coordination of the individual dicasteries' work. This is written in Christus Dominus, Article 9. Then it was Pope Paul VI who took up this concern, this wish of the Council Fathers, among many other initiatives, and implemented a fundamental reform of the Roman Curia, adapting it to the contemporary requirements. In doing so, he was particularly mindful of maintaining a balance between tradition and reform, or rather, organic development. Paul's reform extended over nearly the entire duration of his pontificate, spanning more than 12 years. After enacting partial changes through individual legislative measures, he ultimately promulgated an apostolic constitution entitled Regimini Ecclesiae Universae. The title itself was programmatic, as the document in 136 articles set forth norms for the governance of the Universal Church. Under this constitution, the Curia was organized into 9 congregations, 3 tribunals, 6 offices, and 3 secretariats. The Secretariat of State was granted a position of primacy and became a kind of central authority for control and coordination. Paul VI significantly elevated its status. He also established, for example, the Pontifical Council for Laity and the Study Commission Justitia et Pax. His reform was characterized by increased internationalization, greater collegiality, an emphasis on service, interdicasterial cooperation, efficient and effective functioning through clearly defined competencies, the avoidance of related conflicts, and a streamlined organizational structure. Pope Paul updated and modernized the Roman Curia in accordance with the needs of the time, transforming it into a papal central administration whose service-oriented character he particularly emphasized. Maybe you may wonder why I have devoted more attention on the reform of Paul VI than to the 2 previous ones. The reason is simple, not because I've written a book about it, no. The innovative structural foundations he laid for the Curia served as a decisive basis for the 2 subsequent reforms carried out by John Paul II, 1988, and by Pope Francis, 2022. Under John Paul II, the number of congregations and tribunals remained unchanged. However, the category of pontifical councils gained in significance, reflecting their role as advisory bodies to the Pope and the College of Bishops. Well, I could say very much more about the history, but I think at this point it's maybe enough, and we can go on with the current structure. Maybe this is also more interesting for you. Current structure under Praedicate Evangelium. The Apostolic Constitution Praedicate Evangelium from 2022 by Pope Francis redefined the organizational structure of the Roman Curia. Pope Francis abolished the categories of congregations, councils, and secretariats, grouping them all under the general term dicastery. Despite this terminological change, most curial bodies remained intact, although some were merged. The current Curia consists of the Secretariat of State, 16 dicasteries, 3 tribunals, 6 economic entities, and 3 offices. I don't want to listen all the singular dicasteries, but I think you know them. But maybe, for example, I say some of them. For example, dicastery for evangelization, doctrine of the faith, service of charity, or for the Eastern churches, bishops, for the clergy, and so on. I'm sure you know about the dicasteries. And the 3 tribunals: Apostolic Penitentiary, the Supreme Tribunal of the Apostolic Signatura, and the Tribunal of the Romana Rota. And within the economic entities, for example, the Council for the Economy or the Secretariat for the Economy. And the offices, maybe I list one, is the Prefecture of the Papal Household, for example. This breakdown about the diverse dicasteries and tribunals offices shows a clear structure and, compared to Pastor Bonus and Regimen Ecclesiae Universae, no significant differences in overall design. That's enough for the current structure. Let's go on with its function and tasks of the Roman Curia. This section now does not aim to explain the specific duties of each dicastery, but rather to highlight their overall function and service. As quoted from Predicate Evangelium, the Roman Curia is the body the Pope ordinarily uses in exercising his supreme pastoral office and universal mission in the world. It is at the service of the Pope and of the bishops, as Predicate Evangelium Article 1 says. The focus here is on its service to the Pope, so the topic. So I will not delve further into its service to the bishops. By virtue of his office, only the Pope, according to Canon 331, the Code of Canon Law, holds supreme, full, immediate, and universal ordinary power, meaning he alone possesses the executive, legislative, and judicial authority over the universal church. This sounds like a tremendous task, and I would say that it is. This is where the Roman Curia comes in. And why? Well, to assist him, the Pope, in these responsibilities, as it has done throughout the centuries. Practically speaking, the Pope could not handle everything on his own. The Curia cannot act independently or against the Pope. It has no autonomous authority. Rather, it exercises vicarious power in his name. While legislation is reserved to the Pope, the dicasteries carry out administration and the tribunals exercise judicial authority. There are exceptions, however, the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, for example, which acts as a tribunal in certain matters like the delicta graviosa. The tasks of the Curia are diverse. It advises the Pope on theological, political, and administrative matters, and ensures the efficient governance of the global church. It also implements the Pope's decisions. Some of the main functions of the Roman Curia may be summarized as follows, and I emphasize may, because these tasks are not presented here in exhaustive detail. But maybe I could say some of them. First, advising the Pope. In the various areas indicated by the names of the dicasteries, the Curia serves in an advisory capacity to the Pope, whenever he so desires. For example, the dicastery for legislative texts assists the Pope in the proper drafting of legislation he intends to promulgate. Or the dicastery for evangelization may offer proposals for missionary or pastoral initiatives and so on. These are merely illustrative examples. Then another task, administration of the universal church. In this regard, the Curia assists the Pope by overseeing and managing all dioceses, religious orders, bishops, and clerics. It is responsible for the formation of clergy and prepares appointments, transfers, or dismissals. It also handles the financial and asset management of the Apostolic See. Then, the administration of the sacraments and the liturgy. The Curia ensures the proper celebration of the sacraments and the liturgy by issuing guidelines and norms for liturgical celebrations and by preparing liturgical books and translating them into various languages. Another important task, safeguarding of doctrine. This function is primarily carried out by the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, which assists the Pope in overseeing Catholic teaching and correcting doctrinal errors when necessary. Then the dialogue with other religions and Christian denominations. The Curia fosters also and manages interreligious and ecumenical dialogue on behalf of the Holy See. Judicial authority. The Apostolic Signatura and the Romana Rota exercise judicial authority on behalf of the Pope, particularly in administrative proceedings, marriage nullity cases, and penal procedures, as regulated by the Code of Canon Law and extra-legal norms. The Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith grants absolutions in the Forum Externum for ecclesiastical penalties reserved to the Apostolic See, while the Apostolic Penitentiary handles such matters in the Forum Internum. One last example, diplomacy and international relations. The Roman Curia is also responsible for foreign policy and relations with states. Thus, it assists the Pope not only in the internal organization and governance of the Church, but also in matters of external diplomacy. It maintains diplomatic relations with other states and international organizations, safeguarding the interests of the Catholic Church throughout the world. The Secretariat of State plays a key role in this regard. It assists the Pope directly in the exercise of his supreme office and is responsible both for relations with states and for the day-to-day affairs of the Pope. Since the time of Paul VI, the Secretariat has also served as a central coordinating body of the Curia. Well, the aforementioned points, or the examples that I gave, are merely only examples of the Curia service to the Pope and are by no means exhaustive. It is important to emphasize that the Pope is free in his use of the dicasteries and tribunals, and likewise free to reserve any case to himself, effectively treating it as a materia reservata or a matter of personal jurisdiction. Let's go on to the next point here, interdicasterial collaboration. This is a shorter point, but I like to emphasize it anyway. For the Roman Curia to function effectively, it requires sound organization, efficiency, prompt processing, the competence and qualification of its personnel, integrity, and the clear definition and delineation of areas of responsibility. At the same time, a willingness to engage in collegial cooperation is essential. Whenever a matter pertains to more than one dicastery, an interdicasterial approach is employed. This is both practical and necessary, as it allows for the combined expertise of various individuals to contribute to the handling and resolution of given issue. For example, in cases involving a religious priest, both the dicastery for the clergy and the dicastery for institutes of consecrated life may hold relevant competence. The Vicate Evangelium explicitly references multiple areas of shared responsibility that require consultation with another dicastery. That's all to the fifth top. So very fast we have arrived at a summary and conclusion, but let me say some final words. The Roman Curia assists the Pope in the government of the Universal Church. To this end, it has been entrusted with administrative and judicial functions, which it exercises in his name. As we have seen, the Curia has continuously evolved over the centuries through both major and minor reforms, maintaining its fundamental structure established by Paul VI despite various adjustments in the distribution of responsibilities. Its functions, as we've seen, are diverse and wide-ranging. At the core, however, lies a consistent objective. This is important: to assist and support the Pope through maximum efficiency and a spirit of service. Given its responsibilities in administration and judiciary matters, one might be tempted to equate the Roman Curia maybe with a secular government, agencies, or courts, or something like that. Yet, it cannot be directly compared with such institutions. First, because its scope of competence pertains specifically to ecclesial and spiritual domains, such as the liturgy of evangelization, for example. Second, because it does not serve a secular ruler, but rather the Pope, the successor of St. Peter. According to Pope Francis, here comes a quote, "The Roman Curia contributes to the communion of the Church with the Lord only when it seeks to nurture the relationship of all the faithful with Jesus Christ, when it zealously pursues the plans of God and the gifts that the Holy Spirit bestows upon the Church, and when it strives to promote the vocation of all the baptized to holiness. For this reason, it is essential that in all curial institutions, service to the mystery of the Church remains united with a living experience of communion with God. This expressed in shared prayer, spiritual renewal, and the regular celebration of the Eucharist. Likewise, the members of the Curia, through their encounter with Jesus Christ, should carry out the task with joyful awareness as missionary disciples in the service of the whole people of God." And this is written in Praedicat Evangelium, Article 6. Such a disposition is likely unparalleled outside the Church, I think. And yet, it is precisely this that distinguishes the Roman Curia: its humble and faithful service to the Pope, and thus to the entire Church. Although the Curia may at times appear to be a distant or hidden institution, its work has a profound impact on the entire Catholic Church. Just as it has continually developed and responded to the needs of the times throughout history, so too will it remain in the future, an instrument at the service of the universal Church, and above all, of the Pope. It will be of great interest to see how Pope Leo XIV will further develop and perhaps reform the Curia's mission. Thank you very much for your attention.